Hi, I'm Connor Yakamini, and today I'd like to talk to you about the prevalence of dental caries in 4 major countries. I'd like to start by talking about what exactly dental caries are. In more layman's terms, that's dental cavities. In dentistry, they're referred to as caries. And what these are, according to the New Oxford American Dictionary, a carie is decayed or crumbling tooth or bone. And this occurs primarily by pathogenic microorganisms within the oral cavity. And these pathogenic organisms are part of the oral microbiota that is common in everyone's mouth from the time of birth till the time of death. And these pathogenic bacteria, if not taken care of with good oral habits, they can form plaques on the teeth. And what they do as plaques is they start to digest food from meals that was not evacuated from the oral cavity after a meal. And in doing so, they break down this food and they produce acids. And these acids can demineralize and weaken the tooth enamel. Once it gets through the enamel, it'll hit the dentin, which is the layer beneath. And this dentin is a little bit less dense. It is prone to crumble. And once it gets through the dentin, if it's not treated or filled, it'll hit the tooth pulp. And this is very painful because that's where the nerves and vasculature are. And so a tooth that is decayed all the way to the pulp will typically be removed. And this is because it is painful, but also these pathogenic bacteria can get into the bloodstream and circulate, all due to this open sore in the tooth. And so in accordance with this article, they define dental caries as decayed, missing, or filled teeth. And understanding the oral microbiome is crucial to understanding how dental caries occur in a population and what trends seem to be present amongst different populations. So some preventative measures for dental caries are brushing, and this is just a mechanical removal of bacteria from the surfaces of the teeth. And there's also flossing, which will get the harder to reach areas. And what this does, this is another mechanical method to remove the bacteria. These two methods cannot get rid of plaques, and so regular visits to the dentist are actually what helps with this. The dentist can mechanically remove these plaques in a regular checkup. And what's ironic is that what people like least about these activities, the bleeding gums or the swelling tissue, is actually the body's chemical way of keeping the bacteria at check. It's a way for the immune system to take into effect an equilibrium of pathogenic versus normal healthy flora of the mouth. And then a more drastic matter for patients whose health is more at risk is a change in diet. And this diet change, it takes years and years for that to change the composition of the oral microbiome, and so these pathogenic species during this time are still there, and you have to be very diligent with what you're eating and how you're taking care of your mouth. And so this isn't something that is typically recommended for normal patients that have high dental caries occurrences. And then the more controversial topic is the fluoridation of water and at-home toothpaste. So in the 70s, water supplies fluoride was added to water supplies, and this was said to strengthen the tooth enamel. As we mentioned in the previous slide, that is the outer surface of the tooth. And this doesn't reduce the pathogenic microorganisms, it just is said to strengthen the tooth. And we'll discuss later in this article if that was actually beneficial or not. So the hypothesis for this paper is that when comparing the effects of age, cohort, and period on a population, the age is the primary, or is as an individual ages, there tend to be more caries that occur. And so age just, again, refers to the age of the individual that is having this survey done. The cohort refers to each generation that is part of this study. And then the period refers to the different advancements that occur in oral health as well as healthcare in general. So the different period in times in which new dental practices are instigated, or healthier diets, or more understanding of genetics, even how the microbiome affects different characteristics of health. And in support of the hypothesis is another paper by Burcham, and he states that the number of pathogenic microbiota tends to increase as the age of an individual increases. In this paper, de-identified aggregate data was collected from 4 industrialized countries, and the data collection started in the late 50s and are continuing on today, but this paper contained all the data from the late 50s to 2010. And these 4 countries were selected because they're large industrialized countries with a large population. Their data sheets were readily available, and so what this means is that when the data was collected, it wasn't stored or archived, it was produced for researchers in various fields to collect and find trends in. And lastly, they defined caries in the same way as decayed, missing, or filled teeth. And as we're going to see in the figures, this is represented by the DMFT index on the y-axis. And again, DMFT just stands for decayed, missing, or filled teeth. The 4 countries studied were England and Wales, the United States, Japan, and then Sweden. And this data, because there are 3 variables of unknown relationship, Tobias in his paper mentioned that when there are significant amounts of variables with unknown relationships, that a partial least squares regression can be applied to them. And what this does is it accounts for large amounts of data. It allows future trends to be predicted. It also accounts for missing data. And this missing data is understandable to see how that happens. It's 4 large countries that occurred over 50 years. So there are some pieces of data that may not be accounted for in all the surveys. And this partial least squares regression accounts for that. Getting into these graphs, or figures, there'll be 3 figures, each one composed of 4 separate sets of graphs. And they're labeled A, B, C, and D. A is England and Wales, B is the United States, C is Japan, and D is Sweden. And as you can see here, there is a trend across all 4 nations, and moving from right to left, the occurrence of dental caries increases, and that's showing that the age is also increasing. For this next graph, it's broken down into 3 separate graphs for each nation or country. And at the top, it's the age in years. In the middle, it's the period effects. And in the bottom, it's the cohort effects. And in this paper, the cohort, there was no trend established. It was a non-linear trend. It didn't fit the partial least squares regression, and so it's kind of neglected. But there was a significant trend for the period as well as the age. And I'll get into this a little bit later in the paper, but as age increases, you'll see that occurrence of dental caries increases, but as the period changes, so from the 50s to now, the occurrence of dental caries is less per group of people. Okay, this slide, it's similar to the last one, but instead of just a predicted value, the actual values of each decayed, missing, or filled teeth is present. The very bottom of each graph is dark gray, and this represents the damaged teeth. The middle lighter gray represents the filled teeth. Oh, sorry, the middle is the missing teeth. And the top kind of medium gray are the filled teeth. So the rates of dental caries appear to increase as a population ages, regardless of the period of the cohort. And so although there was a trend noticed in period, this did not change the fact that dental caries increased with age. And this is partly due to the pathogens that are present. As I mentioned earlier, they tend to increase as an individual ages. Reasons for the significance of age on caries is one species that was specifically mentioned is Treponema species of bacteria, and these are the most common pathogenic bacteria associated with dental caries. And also, it's understood that as you age, there's less concern for healthy oral habits, such as brushing your teeth or flossing twice a day, or even visiting the dentist. And so to get into the results, for England and Wales, as I mentioned earlier, you see a trend increase as the age increases. You also notice that there were 5 collection points. And the youngest group studied were 16, and it went all the way up to older than 75 for England and Wales. There's only 3 bars for that age group and the age group below it because they weren't accounted for until more recent studies. In the middle graph, you'll just see that the difference in missing teeth versus filled teeth is pretty consistent across age and period. And then in the far graph, you'll again see that as age increases, dental caries increases. And for this, it increased from 11.4 average in the youngest population to 21.4 in the oldest population. For the period, you'll see a decrease from 18 to 15.7. And all of these numbers that I'm giving you are for a 95% confidence interval, and it's accounting for the overlap between the generations. One thing I didn't mention earlier, but you'll notice in the graphs on the very far side, are that there's a dark black line and 2 gray lines on either side. And this just stands for the partial least squares regression. There's the data that was actually given, and then the variation in variables or variation in numbers that could actually be. So it could be a little bit higher, it could be a little bit lower, but the black line is just what is actually given. For the United States, there were only 4 periods of data collection, and again, in the elderly patients, it goes up to 85 plus, and there were only a few data collections for them. They didn't contribute anything until later on in the study, and then they were included. It goes all the way from ages 6 to 85. And the occurrence of dental caries increases from about 5.3 to 17.9 in the oldest generation, but across the period it drops from 7 to 12.5, which is a pretty significant drop. For Japan, the graph closest to me is actually pretty interesting in that they collected data every 6 years, and in having more data collections, you can see more trends appear that weren't present when only 5 or 4 data collections were made. there's something, it doesn't go into this in the paper, but there's something that caused the oldest data collections to have less caries than those in the middle of the pack. So youngest and oldest generations have less caries than the middle generation. And I just kind of raised the question of what happened in this country at this time, or what didn't happen that caused these dental caries to increase for that period of time. The youngest was aged 5, and this went all the way to greater than 75. And dental caries made a significant jump from the youngest age group to the oldest. It went from 3.6 to 24. And over the course of the period, there was no noticeable change in dental caries. For Sweden was very different than the other nations in that data was only collected from cities or states that they felt represented the country as a whole. And also, each age group was only contributed by only a representative age. So 10-year-olds, 20-year-olds, 30-year-olds, all the way up to 80-year-olds. And without including the whole population, you kind of miss out on actual representative data, because one age does not represent the entirety of a population. But still, you'll see that the occurrence of dental caries increased from 7.1 to 21.4 in the oldest age group. For the period, there wasn't too much of a drop, but it went from 18.3 to 15.3 as the period went on. One more note to mention about this: in the other graphs, we noticed that the filled teeth were less than the missing teeth, but in Sweden, the filled teeth predominate over the missing teeth. Again, this paper doesn't go into the why of this, they just point out that it's something significant to notice. There were a lot of shortcomings in this paper. It made it difficult to follow the science, but data was not gathered consistently between populations. As you heard me point out on each graph, for some it only went to an age that was stated as greater than 75. For the United States, it was an age group that was greater than 85. 5 collections were made for England and Wales. Only 4 were made for the United States and Sweden. And then data was collected every 6 years for Japan, yielding 12 data collections. And this was interesting because we could see more of the trends present in Japan's data. Another aspect is that this paper seemed a little bit biased. They stated their hypothesis, and they only tended to focus on the effects of age on dental caries. They discussed period a little bit, but not too much. They just presented that there was a correlation in change in period on dental caries. And then cohort was almost neglected completely once they mentioned that it did not follow a linear trend when the partial least squares regression was applied to it. A third point is it's impossible to know for sure why teeth were damaged or missing. There are various reasons for this, and it doesn't have to be dental caries specific. And so when you include all missing teeth, all damaged teeth as caries, you're not getting an accurate representation of what is going on in that population. The different countries also did not include all the teeth. So Japan and Sweden did not include third molars, whereas the United States, as well as England and Wales, did include third molars in their data sets. This didn't affect the results too much because these countries weren't compared to one another. They were just compared to themselves across the age, across the period, and across the cohort. And this paper only used developed countries. It didn't use undeveloped countries, and so you don't get an accurate representation of what the world oral health population looks like in dental caries. Yeah, we know what industrialized large population countries look like, but that doesn't give us an accurate representation of what the world looks like. So some conclusions that can be made is that the hypothesis was supported. As the age increased, so too did the occurrence of dental caries. This just means age is a significant contributor to oral health. And then despite the following, frequencies of dental caries does increase as individuals age. So despite the emphasis of importance on good oral health habits in children, dental caries continued on into adulthood and got worse. And so in a paper by Shaw, he mentioned that emphasis on good oral health habits in children is beneficial because it sets up a healthy microbiome for the future. He also discussed that this can change, but it takes years and years of poor oral health habits to have a negative impact on the oral microbiome. And then despite the fluoridation of water in at-home toothpaste, there is no significance in data collected before the 70s versus after the 70s. It also didn't, that's all that there is for that. And then despite the variance in composition of the oral microbiome from family to family, this is just saying that although the oral microbiome does change just from house to house, city to city, country to country, there's still a core oral microbiome that is affected by age, and it doesn't change throughout the world. It is constant. And then as a final mark, just practice good oral health habits, brushing your teeth, flossing regularly, and visiting the dentist can save you a lot of money and a lot of teeth down the road. Some future studies that could be done is a similar study to the one discussed in this paper, but with more of a longitudinal focus. This paper only included random populations of random surveys for 4 nations, and I think it would be interesting if you could follow a large group of people throughout the duration of their life and have surveys taken on each visit that they go to the dentist, or on once a year, once every other year. And then more diverse countries should be included, not just large industrialized countries that have easy to access data. Another future study that could be done is sequencing the core oral microbiome that I mentioned in the previous slide. I think understanding what is going on in the pathogenic species that are present in the oral microbiome around the world, as well as the healthy microbiome around the world, would be beneficial in future treatments, as well as maybe more specific diets for how to prevent caries and how to keep pathogenic bacteria at bay. It'll also be interesting to learn what their products are and how to prevent them or even block this metabolic pathway. And then lastly, another study that could be done is the effects of dental visits on the microbiome composition of individuals. It's recommended to go to your dentist twice a year, and I'm just curious if this has a significant impact on oral health, or it's just to just as insurance to make sure that you don't have poor oral health habits. What you could do is collect data before and after each visit and see if this has an impact on the pathogenic species, and if this is necessary twice a year, once every other year, or what can be done in the future to lower the cost of dental health care. And so that's my presentation. Here are my citations. Thank you for watching.